Dinner. The first day after Shell. Lark kept her head down over dinner. Mostly. It wasn't exactly spying on the Imperial family. Well, not spying, anyway. So, Melondi was really Princess Kalira, and since their huddle in the library while being shot at, she knew Lark was a reporter, doing an undercover story on Professor Warwick. Alright, so she'd blown her cover. After all, they thought they were going to die. Of course, that brought up some questions later, though less than she would have expected. It seemed that her background had already been exposed by the interior. Goddess, the nightmares she'd had after that first week had been unbearable, but they had passed. She'd gotten a handle on the work with the help of Desi and the others, and while there had been certain direct threats passed down to her from the network, they were the sort of thing you'd expected. She was not to paint the Imperial family in an unflattering light, along with a lengthy list of just how that might happen. Her work would be reviewed by a senior agent of the Interior before it ever saw broadcast. It had been almost her only communication from the Home Office since all this began, but her boss had inserted a personal note telling her the network execs were pleased. She'd gotten a raise. And the Interior had casually mentioned that if she screwed up, there was an unlisted ice planet with her name on it. Lark picked at her dinner and smiled again. She'd gotten a raise. Alright, the whole summarily exiled in perpetuity thing sounded bad, but that would all be handled on the back end. Anything that looked suspect would be edited out, and here she was, with a front row seat beside an Imperial princess, and put together a good documentary about one human professor that just kept giving. All she had to do was not screw up the story, or forget to edit out something bad, and keep her grades up, or else. That test failure by the visiting professor had sucked, but now she had a chance to get her grades back on track. It had taken almost 2 weeks before she and Bree had seen the last nosy reporter show up for a press briefing. For the last 4 days, it had been just dealing with that hunched-up, overweight bitch munching bagoon puffs all alone at the gate, before even she'd finally stopped showing up. She seriously needed to talk with Bree. Soon. Maybe. Thou shalt not expose Princess Kalira had been pretty firm in the email. This was going to take some time. In the meanwhile, she had another angle on her story, right here at dinner. Warwick was getting married in a surprise ceremony, was adopting a Shilvanti girl as his daughter, and had just adopted a Pezrin too. Whatever a Pezrin was. Okay, what a Pezrin was physically she could see with her own eyes. The girl was 4 seats down on the other side of the table, after all. That didn't exactly tell her what a Pezrin was, what kind of people they were, what they were like, or why Professor Warwick had adopted her. All of that wasn't clear. Desi's story about her being a cannibal and wanting to eat him couldn't be true. Sweet goddess, it was true. Dinner had been a pretty quiet business compared to usual. All the girls were there, even Desala sat with them these days, but Desi had invited Zenshiki to sit with them. The girl was pretty enough in an odd sort of way. She was so alien that you couldn't tell below her neck. The academy uniform covered her up, and she had a pretty normal figure. A bit slim, and certainly she was short. At barely 5'10", Lark could actually look her in the eyes. That wasn't so bad, though after the conversation so far, it was hard not to notice the claws. Thank the goddess. It was pretty hard to give thanks to the Empress these days, when her daughter was sitting next to you. Thank any goddess she kept leaving her Omnipad set to record. This was pure platinum. You couldn't make something this good up. So, they say you're going to join us here at the academy? Sephir tried again, waving a hand at her generally. Sephir was good-natured, but good-natured, seemed to fall into the Pezrin girl like a black hole. Light went in and nothing came out. Well, nothing much. The academy uniform gave it away, Desala said, though there wasn't much bite to it. It was pretty obvious. Self-evident, even, but everyone was feeling a little bit of a strain. Getting Zinshiki to talk was the polite thing to do, though it was putting the wedding meeting on hold. Lark watched the Pezrin girl a bit for some reaction. She wasn't a stone. She was taking things in. I seem to be doomed to attend what your people call higher learning, instead of pursuing one of my people's traditional vocations, Zinshiki sighed. Lark perked up and listened. It was the first thing she'd really said, and all the girls looked a little surprised at the glacier thawing. My Hachakt has deemed it so. Your traditional vocations? Builder spoke up from where she sat. Murdering people? Goddess! Lark cringed inside, but it was the question that was all on their minds, and surely the girl had to have her version of things. We do not murder, Zinshiki said flatly, looking over at Belder and fixing her with that uncanny stare of hers. Belder had the decency to look confused, but pressed on like a Turox. Goddess bless her. The woman had no guile in her at all, but maybe that was the only thing that would get Zinshiki talking. But Desi said you were going to eat him. That you kill... Is it murder when your marines kill with the blessing of the Empire? Zinshiki blinked slowly, before almost canting her head. It looked so odd that maybe it was even sincere. I was performing a sacred rite of my people. That brought the conversation to a screaming halt again, and Lark looked at the others. Everyone seemed to be looking at everyone else, though Melondi's looked like her teeth were doing a tectonic grind. Note to self, Zinshiki doesn't know. They say you're going to be my sister. Desi made it sound like a question, though it seemed everyone knew. Not why exactly, but she was trying again. Desi was a good soul, and Lark felt a special kinship with her. Not only was she the only other girl here who wasn't a noble, if it hadn't been for Desi's help, she'd have been flailing wildly towards flunking out of the academy. No story, no raise. Deeps, she'd probably have to work up to get her old job back on the night desk. So they say, Zinshiki said flatly. It wasn't like the Pezrin girl didn't express feelings. That much had become very clear when someone passed by their table and stepped on her tail. That much and more. The girl was fast, and before anyone could blink, her hands had been around the fresh woman's throat. All she said was, "That hurt," before letting go and sitting down. But her tail, her Asiac, had thrashed for minutes after. So she did have feelings. She just didn't want to show them. Lark filed that away in her mind. Desi had said the Shilvanti at the other school had treated her badly. Maybe that was why Warwick was adopting her. One alien looking after another. But Zinshiki was supposed to come from an extended family. There were a lot of pieces to put together, but maybe she could get a few more tonight. And that happened after you tried to eat him? Pris said, laying a hand on Belder's arm, stopping the girl from saying something even more blunt. It was still a pretty blatant question, but getting the conversation out of Belder's hands felt like taking away a grenade from a 3-year-old. It sometimes seemed impossible the girl had gotten 6 dates, and was now on the brink of a wedding with her boyfriend. Or that they had an understanding. She'd only met Liam briefly, but the more she could meet, the better. Humans couldn't all be the same. Lark shook her head and focused on the conversation. There would be time to listen to the recordings again, and put her thoughts together later. Zinchiki turned and fixed Pris with an unnervingly direct stare.
I try to honor the elder hero who nearly died saving the lives of others, through a tradition of time beyond counting. I stood ready to keep his name from dying out and passing into oblivion by giving every single moment until my dying breath honoring his name. And I still do.
Zinchiki blinked once, lifting her head defiantly, then looking over at Desi.
What have you done to earn his care? I made him a suit,
Desi spluttered. Zinchiki extended a claw, and might have been studying it assiduously, but her eyes never left Desi.
Touching.
You can knock off the sarcasm, Desala spoke up from the other end of the table, startling everyone. Until Zinchiki arrived, she'd been the quiet one. At least now she was acting like a person. Desala leaned her chin on one hand. Deshin told us he's given you his name because you were going to honor him to death otherwise.
It isn't sarcasm.
Zinchiki slowly and pointedly turned to stare at Desala.
I meant every word.
Fine, Desi exclaimed, and Lark watched her half rising from her seat as Mel and Nesfa pulled her back down. It was a pretty rare loss of control coming from her. The point is, all of that could have been avoided if you'd explained your traditions.
You want to know? Very well. You are being nicer than the other Shulvanti I have met, so I will indulge you, even if I don't have a reason to trust you.
Lark watched as Zinchiki swiveled back to look across the table at Desi. Desala simply forgotten.
You want the Pezrin to explain our traditions? Why should we? So the Imperium can ban them when they're inconvenient, or try and use us for its purposes, like the Alliance? So Pezrin can be fodder in its armies, exactly like the Shulvanti are doing with humans? So you could desecrate our most sacred rites, like you tried to do with the hated Rakiri and their hunt? Better you didn't know about them at all. That is why. And humans would be wise to do the same.
Why do you hate the Rakiri? Belder asked, breaking the shocked silence that fell on the table like a blast wave.
My people consider the Shulvanti to be Kurngherhat.
Zinchiki turned back to Belder, her voice as detached and emotionless as ever.
The Rakiri are Kurtrex. Enough like my people to be understood. They are competition. However, they also eat carrion. It is an abomination to us, and their breath smells.
Yeah, all right. That's a thing, Mel muttered, wincing as she shook her head. That doesn't go on all the time. Desi crossed her arms now, not giving up, but she looked over to Mel. Does it? Only when they're not feeling well, Malondi grumbled. Look, I don't want to talk about it. Anyway, that's not the point. The point is, Jacksmy spoke up, slipping in with a nod toward Mel. The point is about the rules you work with. Now, I'm big about working with the rules, and I know sometimes you have to work around the rules, but either way, there are still rules. No one knows what yours are.
Good.
Zinchiki regarded Jax, arching an eyebrow, as she studied her. Good, Pris frowned, breaking in. How do you expect us to work with you when we don't even know what you're going to do next? How's Desi supposed to be your sister? Desi shot Pris a look, but Sephir broke in, her voice apologetic but firm. Pris is right, Desi. I mean, you're saying this is all about family and names, and we're listening, Zinchiki, but you haven't even told Desi what that means. How are we supposed to help you settle in?
I am not here to accommodate your world, I am here to create my own.
Zinchiki bristled for a moment, before holding up one hand, her tail, her Isaiah, twitching in irritation. Lark saw her fur actually shift. When the girl bristled, she literally bristled.
However, you make a valid point. Desi and I are going to be family. I am willing to teach and learn, if you are as well.
That's fair, Desi bit out, uncrossing her arms slightly. You mean the unwritten stuff? Not the 20 kahachakt? I've read that.
You pronounced it correctly.
Zinchiki's ear flickered, and she looked back at Desi with what might have actually been surprise.
Very well. I will try to accommodate your ways if you will learn my sacred traditions. The unwritten stuff, as you call it.
I study, Desi bit out. And, thank you.
You are welcome.
Zinchiki sighed briefly, as if making up her mind.
We should begin now. An important part of our social life is grooming. Friends and family do it daily.
You mean you want us to groom you? One of the Kerbal sisters sputtered in disbelief.
No. I mean that if one of you tries to pet me, or steps on my Asaic, you lose a hand.
Fair, Desi bit out, uncrossing her arms, as Mel leaned in, nodding. And if one of us ends up clawed up, or where it comes to harm, we're going to rip your fucking tail off.
I believe I can work with that.
Zinchiki scanned their faces and blinked, slowly, before looking back at Desala.
You seem overly welcoming compared to the others. Why?
Desala didn't miss a beat as she sniffed proudly and picked up her drink. Well, now they can distrust you instead of me.
You must have given them a reason,
Zinchiki replied just as casually, while the rest of the table stared at one another, not sure what they were hearing. I did not! Desala's drink thumped down abruptly, not quite sloshing onto the table, as she glared back. All I've ever tried to do is preserve my family.
Curious. That's all I intend to do, so you and I understand one another.
Zinchiki cocked her head and shrugged toward the other girls.
Besides, they seem better at multitasking than that. I'm sure they can continue distrusting you. Now I will too.
Lark blinked at that, as Desala glowered back, but the look disappeared as fast as it arrived. Desala wasn't lovable. Not long ago, Lark wouldn't have even called her bearable, but she was becoming understandable. So, you liked dinner? Desi said tentatively, breaking the newest silence. I mean, what you eat is important to your traditions, isn't it?
It was acceptable HFY,
Zinchiki shrugged. Considering she had cleaned her plate, Lark had to wonder what acceptable was. But given how fast she was, the lucky Turox probably had a metabolism that burned it all off.
HFY. Something not alive, like plant material, seasonings, herbs, spices. Beside HFY, there is Ekrasas, which is freshly dead, Eketh, which is quite dead, Ekosh, which is very, very dead, Ekahoa, which is dead and dry-aged, Ekpu, which is carrion, and Hookuth.
Mel rolled her eyes. Enough about carrion. What's Hekpith? Lark asked, canting her head. All right. She couldn't make the family look bad, but this story was too good not to get, while the getting was easy.
Hekpith. There is a creature in the Gerelos system that keeps moving after you kill it. There was an addendum.
Zinchiki shrugged, then looked over at Desi.
It is not quite like carrion, which is not to be eaten. It is nutritious, but you would not want to eat it.
Can we all please stop talking about carrion? Belondi exclaimed. Yeah, it's kinda gross. We just ate, one of the twins said, while her sister nodded enthusiastically. Yes, Mel said firmly. Besides, we do need to have the wedding meeting. It's tomorrow. Lark nodded along with the others. The wedding was important too, after all. Professor Ramirez and Professor Burgress were handling the details, but they'd given Desi some chores to help sort out.
I thought we just need to keep an eye on him until before the wedding, and make sure no one else says anything, Bree said uncertainly. I mean, Lark and I have the video crew set up, and we're pretty sure we can get it televised, at least on the V-blog. Yeah, probably that, Lark said quickly.
Somewhere, someone was doing her old job at the night desk, as well as girls working at every other channel. Best to change that topic fast.
Anyway, we have it squared away, all right? What else is there?
Well, Desi pulled out her Omnipad and pulled up a file.
It's not much. Professor Burgress says we have to provide something old, something new. The broom probably counts. Something borrowed and something blue. He's not going to be in his blue suit, but they suggested I make him a blue garter. I guess he froze it. But what do we get that's old and that's borrowed?
I have something old, Mel offered tentatively. Trust me.
Okay.
Desi shrugged and swiped at the file.
That just leaves something borrowed. Here's my hachat. I should provide something as well,
Sinchiki spoke up, canting her head to the side. Her tail rose, twitching quickly.
How much will need to be borrowed? I do not know,
Desi frowned, swiping through the file.
The more the better?
I will take care of it.
The Pezrin nodded firmly. Pod 2 says she's disappeared from the dorm. In the heart of the bunker, Captain Salani watched. Sergeant Kalani shook her head in disbelief and carried on. How in the deeps can they lose her like that? It's not like we have her on camera either, Sergeant Vaco said dolefully. Camera control was usually her job, and she didn't look happy about it. That's enough, both of you. Pod 2 still has to maintain their cover, Salani sighed. Keep looking, though. Agent Davari has taken her off our plate for this week only, while Tala's pod figures out how she's managed to spot all our cameras. I want us to be able to track her when the week is up. We don't know she's seen the cameras, do we? Vaco said petulantly. Captain Setar sent me a picture of her taking one down in the hallway outside her room. She's put them all back except for that one, but she definitely knows they're there. Salani shook her head slowly, not wanting to feed the air of exasperation. Look, she isn't our problem for one whole week. Let's try and enjoy it. Pull up cam 34 on the main feed. That was Warwick's bedroom cam. It was a bit early, but... That lucky bitch, he's at it again, Kalani exclaimed. It's not even past dinner yet. He was only gone a week, Vaco shrugged. Call in the lottery? Guys don't act like that if they're gone a year. Vaco was already pulling up the drawer. The ops room really needed space for more than 4, but no one ever failed to fill in the last chair. He doesn't even know he's getting married tomorrow. What if he wears out? That would be a first, Salani said laconically, though it took effort. She needed to get laid. It's a shame they're not staying on campus after the wedding, Kalani grinned. Think about that video. We've never seen him with 2 girls. Salani pondered the main monitor. Now that was a thought. We could have a lottery for who tells them, right? She said casually. Sam had given up on the whiskey. It was a nice indulgence, but the trip was almost over. That said, there was still the matter of keeping the peace. Ian had disappeared unhappily into his cabin after finding out the local temperature. It wasn't as bad as back home this time of year, but the local temperatures around the capital had fallen into the cold side, which was uncomfortable for Shivanti. Ayam made some noises about adjusting his wardrobe, and it made himself scarce. Fair enough. He had brought 4 trunks. Big ones. That left keeping company with Sammy and Marin. For all he loved them, Sammy just didn't do well with boredom. Visiting the academy was one thing. Seeing Akime would probably keep them busy for days. Sam smothered a smile at that and pulled up his omnipad, jotting out an entry, note to self, pick up some things to keep Semi occupied for the trip home. Hopefully, whatever covert nonsense they were being poured into on the side wouldn't get too deep. This should still be a vacation. Of course, that left him keeping Marin company. She'd been a bear after the first few weeks of the trip, though Semi hadn't known they were being a bother. Well, maybe. Semi adored Marin, and sometimes Sam wondered if it was the makeup sex. It didn't matter. They were deep inside the Shield system, operating under local traffic control, on the trip in from the system's FTL limit, and Marin had been keeping busy. If all went to plan, they'd be there tomorrow. There was even a message from Akame that had just come in and...
Are we there yet?
Sammy's head poked around the bulkhead into the cockpit, led by the long emerald rabbit ears. Over on the control couch, Marin winced. Definitely shooting for the makeup sex. One more day, Sam called back brightly. Life with Sammy was never boring, but they didn't do well with time on their hands. For now, this particular bomb was almost defused. There was still the trip back. Come on in, we just got a message from Akame. Sammy bounded in quickly enough. Gods loved them, but Sam still hadn't been able to get Sammy out of the rabbit pajamas. Well, not often. Oh, let me see. Sammy was grinning from ear to ear as they settled into the couch beside Sam. Why didn't you call me? It just came in. Sam shook his head, passing over the omnipad. I didn't even have a chance to read it myself yet. Sammy was already swiping it open, their green eyes fixed on the message with a grin. It is. Akame says the award thingy is going to get a lot of coverage, and she can't wait to see us again. She says she's going to throw us a big party. That was one of the things he loved about Sammy. Even after all these years, they still never understood exactly how brilliant they were. God love them. Half the time they were just as easy dealing with people who didn't have a clue about their work. And the other half? The rest of the time it seemed like everyday life was one more delightful discovery. They were infectious about it too. To everyone else, dedicating 2 new buildings for a major science complex and the Imperium's award for academic achievement amounted to a lot more than an award thingy. But as far as Sammy was concerned... We could land there, can't we? At the academy, I mean. Sammy looked soulfully up to Marin, who grumbled before checking the navigation logs for a moment. There are landing pads there, yes. Marin looked back at them both after a minute. The trip was getting close to the end, and she was back to her old self. It's not the main spaceport, but we should be able to request clearance to land the necessity there. Great! You can do that for us, can't you, Marin? It will get us down there right next to the hotel, and we can surprise Akame. Sammy beamed out from under the yellow puffball of hair that stuck out from under the rabbit hoodie. The sooner the better, right? You read my mind, Marin mumbled. Definitely going for the makeup sex. Morning. The second day after Shell. Lark still wasn't a morning person, but she was getting there. Even so, it was kind of a professional requirement. She needed to be awake for classes, but hanging out with the other girls in the bathroom before breakfast was where the good gossip was at. Bree was still in the showers, and these days she was keeping her hands mostly to herself. Mostly. I really need to talk to her. Soon. Wrapping a towel around her hair, she made her way over to the vanity, where Mel, Desi and Belder were getting ready. The twins were back to making themselves identical, which meant they were usually in and gone before anyone else. Desala, Leslie and Priz had their own schedule, due to early classes. Everyone else lived in different dorms, but they all made a point of sharing breakfast. The cafeteria, however, was rarely quiet. This was the place to get all the good stuff, and with the wedding tonight... She watched as Zenshiki left the bathroom. Maybe she was opening up a bit. It might take time, but there was only so much anyone could expect on a first day. Who could tell how social she might become? Damn, the cleaning staff will bitch about hair in the drain. So, they're thieves, Desi huffed quietly, scowling in the mirror after brushing her tusks. Belder stopped what she was doing and looked at Desi in the mirror. What? I can't believe I finally get a real family, and then this. Desi shook her head. Anyway, stealing is their thing. Well, another of their things. They're mercenaries to provide money for their family, they hunt and herd to provide food for their family, and they steal to provide for their family. At least they're consistent. Belder shrugged, and tried to look hopeful. Your real family has a noble and a human, and now a Pezrin. I mean, it could be great, and I'm happy for you, but we've all gotten used to the unexpected from Warwick, right? Melondi said philosophically, waving her comb in the mirror. Let's just focus on the wedding, you know? We have a full day keeping him distracted. I know, and I have to make that garter, though that will only take 2 minutes with the fabber. Desi's shoulders slumped, but it looked like she was getting to grips with the idea. Do you think I should surprise Liam? Belder paused before brushing her hair and canted her head. I mean, Zenshiki said the professor hates surprises, and Liam sounded kinda doubtful when I was talking to him the other day. Zenshiki's only known him 2 weeks. You know a shield guy would find it romantic, being swept off his feet like a handsome prince? Desi said authoritatively. Well, sort of. Switched around, you know. Mel, you know what I mean. It's like something out of a storybook. You're thinking about that with Vadim, aren't you? I am, but there's all that other stuff, you know, Mel said unhappily, before looking around to check the stalls. You know, things. I suppose we're all looking at some big changes in our lives. Belder started brushing her hair, working out a tangle. I mean, we know you're nuts about Vadim. And Desi? You're her family now, right? Maybe. Desi poked through her kit bag. Has anyone seen my comb? Zenshiki shook her head, after lingering in the hall for a moment. Shulvanti? They talk too loud. All right, quietly enough for another Shulvanti, but not for her ears. And there was still the matter of those cameras all over the place. Those would need some thought. But what else was new? Her life had gone from challenging certainty with the warband to whatever this was. Cameras all over the campus were just another distraction. The annoying whine the silly things gave off was easy enough to pick up on once you got within a few feet. Some of them were reasonably new and were much harder. Most were covered in dust. Shoddy antiques. Still, whatever they were for, they weren't there for her. That made them part of the environment, something she had to navigate, but it wasn't a direct threat. Possibly an indirect one, but that was for later. So far she hadn't had any problems with mapping out the ones in the dorm, the classroom and the library, and a few on the commons. They were harder to hear outside, but once she got close enough... The Shulvanti were kahat, not competition. Races like the Rakiri, and maybe the humans, were Kuktreks, worthy competition or adversaries. Alright, No one sensible would invite a Rakiri to dinner, but they could be dinner. They were considered honourable. That much was not in doubt. So where did that put Desi and her friends? They were treating her better than the girls at Soche ever had. For now. Nice was not a quality of the moment. Nice was a quality proven over time. And even they mentioned not entirely trusting the Tsala girl. It needed thought. Regardless of how it turned out, it seemed Desi, was going to be her Sehakt, her sister by Prath. Sister was not a bad description, though what her band sister Raikishi would think of it. Senshiki shoved down a pang of loneliness and dropped the comb outside the bathroom door. Desi would find it there easily enough and expect she'd dropped it. No harm done. Besides, it was a comb. It was a thing of no value or intrinsic worth. A Persian hunter would never bring such a thing back as a trophy to a warband. Thieves indeed. Thieves stole for themselves, not to put food on the table of kits. Persian survived. Here, far from Pesh, that was easy, but that did not change things. Matters could go from plenty to privation in the blink of an eye, and only fools forgot that lesson. It seemed like the Shilvanti had their virtues, but none of them ever went hungry. How will they know what it was like to live on the edge of survival for every morsel of food, when anyone not of your family would take it away? They prided themselves on their power, but their pride was a club, not a scalpel. They did not know what it was like to hang on by their claws. But if they were incautious, that was not their fault. This had been a test of their awareness and nothing more. She would keep testing. That was wise before there could be Iriral, the true trust due to allies. It was a problem for another day. Today, she needed to borrow something of worth.
So, are there any words?
Jama settled into his chair, grinning idly at Tananda Burgress. She'd been quite a looker in her younger days, but too much for a firebrand, trying to educate girls in taking better care of their men. Perhaps the world had moved on past her, but it was Tananda who had started things moving for the better. That said, over the years, she'd become a stickler for being precise, and when things weren't.
No, I've looked everywhere in the datanet for marriage ceremonies, and there's absolutely nothing about reformed druids.
Tana grumbled unhappily, her face crumpling into a scowl.
In the end, I just had to pull everything I could find on human weddings, and try to make something that works sensibly out of it. I'm sure the lad will no mind. He is marrying 2 fine women after all.
Jama nodded encouragingly, and gave her a winning smile.
Just as well he gets on with it. Don't you try smiling at me like that, Jama Hameres. I see right through you, you old tart, she scoffed, waving him off. Though I'll concede that he seems like a decent young man, and Mavere is a nice girl, even if she did hide that she was still married. I'm told there were perfectly good reasons. None of that. She and this other woman should have remarried years ago. And they're getting married now. Adopting young Desi, too.
Tananda huffed a moment, but subsided.
That's true. The poor thing, losing a whole family. It's very good of them to take her in.
So, you have the words for the ceremony, then?
Yes, she nodded curtly. Well, I substituted a few.
Substituted? Jama shot her a quizzical look, setting down his tea.
Tana, I know they were planning a real ceremony in a few weeks, but if it's his local traditions, then we should... Leap rogue and jump whore and you'll be wed forevermore?
Tananda's frown returned in full force as she recited the passage.
Who says something like that at a wedding? Even if it's said in human, that's just filth. I'll grant you it does have a certain
Whimsy.
Jama knew a losing hand when he saw it, and fighting Tananda over the details would have taken until next week. Goddess loved the lass, but they didn't have the time.
Well, whimsy or not, it's out. This is a family school, she said primly. At least the rest of it is there. Odd, but it's there. You should be able to do this. You can, can't you?
Aye, the natives on Huraltal too may be a high priest of Oryotokwe,
he said firmly. And it was true, even if they'd originally thought he was a deity. Still, it had been a party to remember, and their women had been good sports about the whole thing.
It's a living religion, so it's legally valid. Besides, he said his nearest priest is back on Earth. I'm just as good as the next, and besides, I know the lad.
That's everything, including the grain. Why in the galaxy would they pelt each other with grain? I know, you're going to tell me it's wishing them bountiful harvest and all of that, but it seems so, I won't say backward, but it's a bit dated. At any rate, that's everything except for the dancers. Tananda poked at her omnipad. You did get the dancers, didn't you?
Oh, aye.
Jama nodded contentedly, hiding a grin. They were happy to come.
Well, that's certainly fortunate. This dance where they throw money at the wedding couple makes some sense. Tananda nodded. We want something wholesome, after all.
Oh, aye. We have to do that.
It had been an odd day. Miv had disappeared early on, which was fine. Unusual, but fine. It had given him the time to put together the class for tomorrow. The Lost Generation was something that needed context. He'd start with a brief introduction, then set out the rules of the game. With chess club cancelled and 2 weeks of class to work with, that gave him about 14 hours, give or take, with the last hour dedicated to the debriefing. Except for the muted roar of a ship coming down earlier, the campus was quiet as a tomb. That happened now and then when some noble came to visit their daughter, but tonight the walk was empty, even for a winter's evening. Wrapped up as he was, Jama still seemed like he was in good spirits. Tom strolled through the long hall that cut through the cliffside, with Jama chivying him towards the amphitheatre. A vast air curtain was built into the cliff face that allowed the sea to roll in, but kept the temperature in the range of pleasantly cool. There was a low rumble down the way. The sea must be coming in harder than he thought. So, what's your talk about exactly? Tom asked, as Jama paused at the door.
Well now, it's more of a delivery, as such, you see.
The elderly Shilvanti reached up to pat him on the shoulder.
In you go, and up to the stage. There's a good lad.
Up on the stage? Jama, Tom paused in the doorway, as the crowd cheered and the spotlights turned on him.
Jama, what the? Down on stage, lad!
The elderly shill gave him a shove, and Tom had the time to blink his eyes as the spotlights swiveled back up to the stage. Maver and Shalea were standing there, smiling brightly, and dressed in the deep green of Miv's house. They were holding a broom. No. No! No, 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 no! Good God, how did...
You can thank me later, lad, but just now?
Jama leaned in.
Smile a lot, make it look good for them, won't you? A man only does this a few times in his life, and you're getting 2 for 1.
Tom didn't quite nod or shake his head. It felt like he wanted to do both at the same time, and he had to fight away the urge to laugh as Jama hustled him toward the stage. It was a slow processional, as the elderly shill only walked so fast, which probably would have given it dignity if the women in the crowd hadn't started pelting him with, Jama, what is this?
Accra. We couldn't get this rice, you can.
Rice? That's for... Never mind.
Tom was still fighting not to laugh, but the pelting grain hailing down on him made that a lot easier. Together they made it up to the steps, where Miv and Leia smiled at him demurely. They laid the broom reverently on the ground and stepped apart, each holding out a hand towards him. Miv was doing her best to look respectable, despite the cheering and whistles from the crowd. Leia was right there beside her, looking a bit nervous, but hopeful. They looked like angels. Tall, purple angels with tusks. But it didn't matter. They were his ladies.
You can go tonight when they're unwrapping you, lad, and take their hand and jump when I give you the big nod.
Jummer took him by the hand, leading him up. No bride ever got carted to the altar this way. Oh, what the hell. He stepped over between them, with Miv on his right and Leia on his left, and took their hands. As Jama stepped up to the lectern and cleared his throat, the crowd grew hushed. Tom took the moment to look around. It looked like the whole school was there. Ganya was down in front. Desi was there beside Leia's mother's. The girls were there, even Zinshiki. Belda was grinning fiercely and hanging on to Liam, while Melondi held hands with Adim. But Adim was there just behind them, in a puce suit with orange piping, crying into a hanky. What a long, strange trip it's been. Two right there, Jerry. Wait, are those cameras?
Dearly beloved,
Jama intoned, and the crowd went silent.
we are gathered here today to get through this thing called life.
Is that Prince?
An electric word, life. It means forever, and that's a bloody long time. But I'm here to tell you there's something else. Marriage.
Jama raised his head and gave what was undoubtedly a big nod. The crowd started to cheer enthusiastically. It wasn't an exchange of vows, nor a moment of solemn reflection. It was a spectator event, was away from anything and everywhere he'd known. But at that moment, it couldn't have mattered less. Miv and Leia were holding his hands tight, but he was there in the center with them, and when he jumped, they followed along beside. And it was perfect. As strange and surreal and mixed up and alien as it was perfect. And now, according to human tradition, the dancers. Dancers? The auditorium door slammed open, and an apparition appeared at the top of the steps. Tom peered. The figure had a mop of yellow hair, long green ears, kind of like a rabbit, and threw its arms wide.
We're here!
Wait, what kind of alien is that? Tom squinted for a better look, just as the music blared. From either side in the wings, people practically swam onto the stage. They were men. All of them. Shilvanti, Rakiri, Helcom. Humans. Species he'd never seen, but they were all male. There must be 100 of them. They wore black pants, black ties, and white halter tops, and were all holding brooms. The spotlights covered the stage as the exotic dancers surrounded them and began to dance. Chippendales! Tom closed his eyes and grinned. It was done. As surreal as it was, it didn't matter. Dancing alien Chippendales and all, they were married, and wonderful as that was, at least the spectacle was nearly over. Anything else was easy.
Nay then, if anyone has anything to say, let them speak now or forever hold their peace, Jama said firmly. For you ladies in the crowd, reckon that means time for questions and answers from the audience.
Hundreds of hands shot into the air.